last month, and just a few stragglers still coming in. For those of you that might have a few outstanding, and it is just a few, the list is at your place. In other announcements, also want to let you know that we have a new Deputy Director for Planning. Stephanie Pfeiffer was hired as our new deputy. She won't start until May 7th because she has to wrap things up with her current employer, the City of Aurora, but we're really excited about Stephanie's hire, her experience in municipal governance, local planning, and project management. She's been the director of planning for Aurora since 2006 and has about 20 years with the city and has risen up through the ranks. So really looking forward to getting her on board as part of the CMAP team. And just one final announcement you'll see a little bit later on your agenda. We have a presentation from Tom Holzman, the Executive Director of the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation. This corporation, newly found by the 7 county board chairs in the city of Chicago, is a priority for them and something that we're pretty excited about supporting. The fact that the 7 county board chairs in the city of Chicago have come together on a collective effort for economic development, we think it bodes very well for the region. So we're looking forward to Tom's presentation a little bit later on the agenda. Mr. Chairman, that's my report.
Quick report, Joe, thank you. Under the procurements and contract approvals, Angela? Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Board. Seeking approval for 3 procurements. The first one is approval to purchase IT hardware and software, new switches for our back-end infrastructure and phone system. Second one is seeking approval to enter into a contract with Clarity Partners, the vendor we've selected to support our website. And finally, seeking approval for a resolution with Cook County to access their GIS data.
Other questions on those proposed contracts and procurements? If not, the chair will entertain a motion to accept items 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved and seconded?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote of no, and the motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Under the committee reports, Carolyn?
The planning committee met this morning and we discussed the recommendations of the mobility chapter in the Onto 2050 plan, which we will see here shortly. And it covered major goals of the mobility chapter, specific recommendations, discussion of the financial plan, and regionally significant projects, which was a little preview on that one, and major goals of the mobility chapter. We also talked a little bit more about transportation funding and the subcommittee that has been working on transportation funding. And then the committee also learned about the public and stakeholder engagement process, which we will also be talking about here in the near future. So I will leave it at that because we will be seeing everything today.
Any questions of the committee? Thanks, Carolyn. As Joe indicated, we do have a guest speaker, Tom Holzman from the newly formed Chicago Regional Growth Corporation. I remind the board members, especially those from the counties, that this is a proposal that's highly supported by the county chairs, and there will be an ask at the end of this, so please pay attention to the presentation. And Tom, you've got the floor.
Good morning.
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 So we had an incorporation date back in October 2017, in which we said it was a new day, and then we had our first launch event on January 18th. We said that was a new day. We had our first board meeting March 1st. It was yet another, still the same new day for the region. And I'm excited to walk through what is the initial scope of work here for the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation. This story goes back really to about 2012 when the OECD published the report on Chicago and how it was underperforming its potential and not fighting at its weight, if you will. Followed by Cook County's lead for their report that they published led to the elected officials for the 7 counties and the city convening twice a year to talk about building capacity for the region's economic development programs. So for that scope of work in which the group was working together, 4 initiatives came out of the Chicago Regional Growth Initiatives that came out of the Partnering for Prosperity scope of work. Regional truck permitting, the cluster work on the Chicago Metro Metals Consortium, Metro Chicago Exports, and then the adoption of a foreign direct investment strategy. So the point is that this group has been working together for several years. So we have a working collaborative that it came time last year as we looked at capacity and building it full time. It was time to stand up a new organization to be able to take on that scope of work. There are other metropolitan areas across the United States, and I think our argument has been that they're slightly ahead of where we are as a region. There's a movement and there's a program called the Global Cities Initiative, for those that have seen that. The Global Cities Initiative is supported by JP Morgan Chase in partnership with the Brookings Institution to help leaders of metropolitan areas reorient their economy. So there are 28 or 29 metropolitan areas that have participated in this scope of work. Global trade is one of those first pillars that has been brought to everyone's attention in San Diego and Salt Lake City. And as we in the Chicago region embarked upon this journey, we started down that path. So the work has been done, the working group has experience working together, and now it's time for us to play ball, if you will, nationally. So the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation, every 6 months, the elected officials for the 7 counties in the city have been getting together around the 7-county region to talk about these various programs and initiatives. Last spring at the meeting, it was decided that it was time to stand this organization up. So the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation, as I say, was incorporated last fall. It is a regional collaborative approach to economic development for the Chicago region. Our mission is to be a regional economic development organization that drives collaboration between public, academic, and private sector partners to generate inclusive growth and prosperity across northeastern Illinois. Very simple, light lift that we are tasked with performing. Our core values, as we see this, as we kick off this regional approach to economic development, is to stay focused on cooperation, inclusion, and diversity. So again, all 7 counties and the city have been represented across the 4 years of this working group. Our vision is for the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation to provide a platform for collaboration among the partners, the business leaders, economic development partners, academia, at the municipal, state, and regional entity level, and the federal and international agencies. So a very large convening of the group on behalf of the region. Our task will be to prioritize, align, and manage the region's economic development activities to increase competitiveness and improve access for historically disinvested communities. The goal here is that CRGC would be a unified voice for what is this dynamic global northeastern Illinois economy. This is the first scope of work. As I say, we're just building this as we are getting started. The focus area primarily for this first lift is set up on 3 pillars. The first is global programs that I mentioned relative to the Global Cities Initiative and how we expand that for the region. The second would be the regional systems and that connective tissue that ties us all together. And the third being the industry clusters. So what we believe is that the global programs and trade and investment provide strategies to grow our businesses locally while leveraging the regional assets that we have. This is not about moving assets around the region. This is about showcasing the assets that each of the counties, the municipalities have. How do we leverage what those are? How do we engage the business community? And how do we tell that story to the world? For whether it's export activity outbound and trade, or it's specifically being focused on the type of foreign investment we want to attract to this region. The industry clusters, as I mentioned initially, the Chicago Metro Metals Consortium, which was housed at Cook County, is part of the Investing in Manufacturing Communities Partnership. That is an example, and it's one of probably 5 that this region needs to be talking about in terms of significant regional clusters that represent who we are. And lastly, the regional systems is sort of, as I say, that connective tissue. This is the networks of transportation and workforce, the development organizations that help to facilitate. And you can envision that these sectors all do, or these pillars do intersect with each other. So the initial scope of work for this is the global programs, the industry clusters, and the regional systems. If I look and dive down just a little bit further, for those that have not been participating or not aware of this program, the global programs first and foremost increase exports. Very simply, we cast a program called Metro Chicago Exports that was focused on how do we engage small, medium-sized businesses, how do we build a continuum of international trade. So if somebody has not exported, they're in an incubator or an accelerator, or someone who's an accidental exporter, or someone that is a multinational corporation, how do we, the region, think about engaging them and have programming that helps support those activities? So first and foremost, we came up with a pitch competition. This is a very fancy way of matching, let's say, exporting and Shark Tank. This is 4-minute pitches. Businesses stand up and present their value proposition for who they are, their goals and aspirations for international. It's been a great showcase and platform, not just for connectivity, but also to show who these businesses are and what their value proposition is. Second is export tech, and that was a gap, that was a structural gap in this market where we did not have strategy development that was available to these businesses. There is a nationally recognized program and a curriculum from Export Tech developed with IMEC here locally in Illinois, but the NIST, MEP, and the Department of Commerce. So the program was out there and available. It was in 37 other states. It was not in Illinois. So rather than reinventing anything, we've been very conscious about we are not here to be duplicative. We're here to identify gaps. And if there are things that exist, we will bring them here. If they need to be fixed, we'll address fixing them. So Export Tech is a national curriculum that pairs these business owners with export experts, mentors, and market research analysts who help to develop them writing a strategy over 3 months. Again, proven track record that is now operating here in Illinois. And lastly, the grant program. JP Morgan Chase had funded and supported the grant program. This has been in operation in several other markets tied to the Global Cities Initiative. We have awarded just shy of $750,000 to over 100 businesses. This is an export reimbursement program. So if a business says they want to go, without being prescriptive and telling them how to use it, I want to go to a trade show in Germany, they would be reimbursed with skin in the game. Here's a $5,000 reimbursement for a $10,000 expense to showcase your goods at a trade show, or translate your website, or identify partners in a foreign market. This has proven to be a carrot to the program, and we believe that the grant program is here to stay, and that is private dollars that have specifically been earmarked to execute our grant program. So you can see 3 different kinds of outreach to the export initiatives. Global programs, if you flip the other side, it also attracts investment. This is the foreign direct investment opportunity. The strategy was written in unison across the 7 counties and was adopted last spring. Without the capacity or the team to execute this work, this program and the strategies have not been executed to date. So Chicago Regional Growth Corporation will be implementing these strategies that were identified last spring. The first and foremost is strengthening the nest. Things like identifying an FDI advisory council, developing a central platform for where leads come into the region. You can go back to the Amazon HQ2 opportunity, and when the city of Chicago was working for the city and the site development, we were tasked with trying to convene the 7 counties to come together to work on those site selections. So CRGC was that voice to convene the 7 counties in the HQ2 opportunity and help to have that voice presented in that process. We also envision in other markets, there's a protocol and a code of ethics in terms of how we don't fight over leads and investors who want to come to the region. That is in place in other markets like Denver, Milwaukee, and Columbus. And so that is something we envision executing here as well. We think it's important to celebrate the 1,800 foreign businesses that are here. This is, in my mind, this is sort of the reverse welcome wagon. These businesses have been part of our community potentially for a very long time, and at some point we stop thanking them for their investment. And I think it's important for us to go back to the Japanese investment, the British investment, and all of the organizations that are tied to that to support their investment that's here. We don't have an aftercare protocol to, once we attract business engagement, let's say from China, how do we make sure structurally that there is something that is going to keep them investing? We think it's good for their supply chain, but if they can tell the story about the Chicago region to their friends and family and business partners and associates and suppliers, we think that creates additional investment for the region. And part of that will just be celebrating literally the foreign-owned businesses that are in this market. For the FDI, we are also looking to address priority sectors. And as I address, there's clusters and sectors. There's a lot to choose from. We have a very diverse economy. And as a result, we are going to do an initial push toward metals, machinery, and equipment. It's not a long-term decision that we stay in that. This is just, we have to cut our teeth on what is a sector that we can focus on. So we will be going to Select USA on behalf of the region. In future years, you can envision us going to a national show like that to say, we are the Chicago region, but we also put forth an image that showcases what this metals economy would be, or what this business services economy, who we are as that region. This show is coming up very quickly in June, so we'll be attending for this first year while we shape the story of the priority sectors for who we are and the assets that we want to be showcasing. And lastly, we need to be adopting and working to identify a cohesive global identity. And you can think about whether it's export initiatives going to one market, hypothetically a push toward China, and you could look at investment from Germany. How do we prioritize who those markets are that we are exporting to and attracting investment from? And at the end of the day, how do we speak for what is the Chicago region as a brand? And that is something that's going to be developed. This is not first on the list, but in the coming year. If I go back to the result of global programs and the inclusion and the impact, and this was literally without necessarily trying, and we think by being more thoughtful about these programs, what impact we can have with them. So the Export Initiative has a track record that 35% of them, and again, without trying, just a broad outreach, 35% of the businesses that have been engaged were led by women, minority, or veteran organizations. We have good results in export, increased revenues as well as job growth, and to date, 37 million in increased sales and over 100 jobs added as a result of this program. We took an approach this year that we are just rolling out literally next week. I talked about export tech, and with the support of Cook County, we have adopted the block grant funds. So what we did was we said, what are the businesses in South Suburban Cook County? What are their product codes? So you take the NAICS codes that are exportable, tradable goods, and say, we can open these up to new markets. And we bump those businesses up against a register to say, are they already exporting? And if they're not, that allows us to zero in on businesses in this case, South Suburban Cook County with exportable, tradable goods that need help exporting. So the Export Tech cohort is going to be occurring beginning next week in South Suburban Cook County with those businesses that have been identified. And lastly, we think also in terms of inclusion that foreign-owned enterprise investment has the opportunities. And if you think about apprenticeship programs and how we target engagement in disinvested communities, we think there's an opportunity here broadly for investment in global programs that would help targeted outreach in marginalized areas. The second pillar that I mentioned was the cluster activity. So we will, in year one, we think that the strength of fostering our globally competitive industries is a very important thing that, I know CMAP's done a lot of work on this as well. We have, as I say, we focus on the Chicago Metro Metals Consortium. They're up and running. They've done some great programming. We will continue to work with them to understand what is it that that cluster organization needs to look like, and how can we help them replicate for other organizations and clusters in this market, whether it's the Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network that was kicked off last year, or Current, the water cluster that is up and running. And those are just 3 organizations that are already up and running. There's other business services or transportation clusters that we think there's additional opportunity. So again, we're just building this, so we are just starting now to say clusters are very, very important. We need to understand how to make them better, more effective, and then how do we start to scale that into other sectors. Regional systems, we think it's important to improve the economic systems at a regional level. There has been work on the regional truck permitting that has been done to date. One of the things also in terms of improved communication we will be focusing on is facilitating the economic development boot camp. I believe Kane and Kendall will be the first counties to participate in that this year. That is the opportunity for us to help showcase these are regional, this is what's happening with Intersect Illinois, this is what the FDI strategy is for the region, this is who all the service providers are at the federal, state, and local levels. So how does a municipality understand the latest of what's happening in terms of economic development? So it's an educational outreach through these boot camps to broaden that message. We will also be tasked with developing a protocol for collaboration on some of these major projects and investment opportunities. So we envision in the regional systems, and this is the strategy that we will continue to flush out over the course of this year, is that it does need to address very seriously the workforce connectivity and the transportation systems and others on behalf of the region. So it came time to stand the organization up, and I just wanted to make sure you understood a little bit about the crafting of the board that was put in place. We thought it was very important to not have this be just another government-led organization. This needed to be private sector-led, and as a result, we also needed to make sure that we removed the 7 county lines in the city to say, let's look at this as one big region. So the working group had focused on the early priority sectors, and it wouldn't be a surprise to most people in the room that manufacturing, precision metals, pharmaceutical, pharma, bio, food processing, and business services were first and foremost in our thought leadership and engagement. The workforce transportation assets are very important to our economic health, and we're consideration for that as well. And we really needed to make sure that we had the geographic and the diversity across the region, both in terms of gender and diversity. So you can see what is represented across the 7 county region. We asked the leaders of the 7 counties and the city to serve in an ex officio non-voting capacity. So they will be present, but they will not be voting. They have each appointed one economic development professional. So as an example, President Preckwinkle would have appointed Mike Jasso to the board. So each one of the elected leaders has appointed one person to the board. And then what got really interesting is how do we engage the broader civic, academic, private sector, because this is the voice that we really want to be engaging, not just for their perspective, but also for the outreach going forward. And that is where we will continue to push toward the engagement for our board members. So our initial private sector, civic and academic board members, for those that maybe can't see that, Michael Moskow from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, Nim Chania from Northwestern University, Nelda Connors with Pine Grove Holdings, Steve Davis with the Will Group, Joe Slawick with FONA International, Anissa Mutano with Pioneer Service, Jim Rolfe serves actually as our chair from First Midwest Bank, Alberto Pericini from Byline Bank, and Dr. Ann Rondeau from the College of DuPage. So I think being thoughtful and mindful of the diversity that we wanted, the sectors, the geography, we feel very good about the board that is starting off this organization that I will be reporting to. As I say, we had our launch event back in January. The vast majority of the county leaders and board members were able to join us at MHub. It was a great event to celebrate what is a really big day for this region. The fact that we have an organization that is focused on all 7 counties and the city of Chicago. I keep joking that I carry a Swiss passport. I don't. I probably should. But the idea is we need somebody with that voice to talk about the sectors that drive the economy and have sort of a neutral outreach for what is our regional growth. So that is all I have for you this morning. I would ask for your support in continuing to help CRGC drive inclusive economic growth for Northeastern Illinois. It is just the first phase of this. It's a new organization. It's a new day for us, and we're very much looking forward to continuing to build this organization. Any questions?
Comments from the board members regarding this? Tom, in dealing with economic development corps over the years, certainly sub-regional, as many of the mayors have been involved in through their COGs or through their regions, and then also having World Business Chicago. Is there a sense of competition with that type of already existing structures that are out there? Many of them loosely together or barely together. How do you see this fit in with, say, World Business Chicago?
I see this fit in very well as more of an alignment of collaboration, and I would broaden it actually a little bit further to even the Alliance for Regional Development, which is a tri-state perspective, and then if you brought it to the state of Illinois and looked at Intersect Illinois and where DCEO is involved statewide, and then when you come to the region, there's not that one voice. So WBC is on our board, as is representatives from all other 7 counties. We are, as I say, neutral to all 7 counties and the city. We understand by the assessment of the SEDS plans, when we went through all of the SEDS plans, we saw gaps that there's some overlap, and we said, if there's overlap among the economic development partners, that's not our work yet, but that is something that is just out there. We wanted to fill in the gaps. We wanted to build capacity for what people had capacity to do or didn't have or weren't doing well. And I think it aligns very well. WBC has I mean, I don't know, maybe Rita or someone else could comment on WBC specifically, but we have the support through WBC to align with their objectives and goals as we do with every other county.
One of the points that you made regarding being, not necessarily moving one thing from one region to the other, which I'm glad to hear, because part of the problem with, I think, with many of the sub-regional economic development groups is that they're competing with each other. You know,
Yeah.
one gas station's moving to, or one car dealer's moving from one city to another in another sub-region. So I like this concept finally, or hopefully, that it's more globally within our area, that we're looking at new, not necessarily shifting things around. And that's why I ask about rural business, and sometimes over the years it seemed like it was a competitive thing with Chicago and then the metro area. But if we really are looking at an open mind as to what works or whatever we can do to bring something into the region, whether it is Chicago or Northwest or Southwest or South, is really the major point.
I think it's important to understand that the asset mapping across the region, that each county, as everyone knows, is very different. And at the end of the day, this is how do we make a bigger funnel for people to invest in the region, and then within, how do we navigate what is the right alignment for those investments. So we are hoping to keep it, this is not about fighting, this is about working to attract broader investment to the region as a whole.
Rita?
No, I was just going to say that when you talked about filling the gaps, I think what's interesting with this organization is it has an intense labor focus on economic development. I think there are a lot of organizations that have that as part of their mission, but this will be the mission for, and I think that makes a big difference. And I had the opportunity to work with Tom on the exports, and it was really interesting to see the gaps there and what could be done with an organization that focuses not within the boundaries, but all these companies that kind of came out of the woodwork that we didn't even know that were there and really benefited from an organization like this that, again, isn't tied down with boundaries, is able to concentrate on businesses. It's also extremely important when you're working with outside organizations to have this combined voice to be able to talk about it.
And again, my point that I think some of the sub-region economic development groups that are out there don't have really the resources, certainly in the area of exports, to be coordinated or to be informed or the avenues to go about expanding or bringing in an international market to the region. So that's why I think this is also.
I will tell you that there's one really good example here in Kane County specifically, where the export capacity and whether there's staffing for foreign direct investment, but as we were building out the export opportunity for the grants, Kane County, and this is the first time the global cities have seen this across the country, Kane County came up with a matching program for the grant program. So if a business got a $5,000 award from us and they were in Kane County had economic development funds that were earmarked from the Riverboat Casino Fund, and they said for businesses who got $5,000 from what was Metro Chicago Exports, they would get an additional $5,000 grant from Kane County to help grow that international trade. That's a great example of a gap, a county partner stepping up, and resources to help grow the business in those communities.
One
Jerry,
other question.
I just wanted to add that when you asked about World Business Chicago, WBC has been involved from the very beginning and sees this as an added value, not a value we're going to not cooperate.
One of the other natural setups in the region is the community college system, and I would think from a workforce development, that you're going to look into how that can be further grown, so to speak, in understanding the job market and certainly from academia, where their head should be on new programs or new types of classes or courses, both educational and technical.
Yeah, whether it's partnering with any of those schools, and I can tell you that Dr. Ann Rondeau at the College of DuPage is very, very excited to get to work on that topic. Very much so.
Other questions? Well, at the end here, there is an ask, and I think this agency, for what we have done over the years in our plan, in our new plan, has set the groundwork for the right measures to be taken. In other words, action. And when we talked about this new plan, and we talked about we've done our planning, and we continue to do that, but we need some action plans. And I think what's going to be asked here of this board this morning is that we support this organization financially. And I've talked to Joe, and we think that the agency could support it with a $50,000 grant, and but obviously that would take board approval to do that. So are there any questions regarding that?
And Mr. Chairman, we would, bifurcate that into 2 separate budget cycles. That'd be necessary as we scratch together the pennies. We think this is very important to do, but we would ask that half of it be in this fiscal year and the other half in the next fiscal year.
We all have our cash flow situation. So I'll entertain that as a motion to the board that we support the,
I move that the board approve a 50,000 contribution to the County Regional Growth Corporation to be paid in 2 installments of 25,000, one in fiscal year 2018 and the second fiscal year 2019.
I second the motion.
moved and seconded. Are there any final questions regarding? Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Just a question, would we consider this to be an ongoing funding stream for the organization, or have we thought about it?
So at this point, it is a one-time bifurcated contribution.
I should point out that the 7 counties and the city of Chicago have all committed 3 years of funding for this endeavor. I know Cook County and the city of Chicago each are $50,000 a year for 3 successive years, and I think DuPage is similar. I'm not sure that it's partly determined based on the population of the counties, but in any case, those 8 political jurisdictions said this is important to do, and we're willing to put money up for it. The other source of funding has been Chase Bank, and they've been very generous and very enthusiastic in other efforts to bring particularly the private sector in as a supporter of this, which is the pattern across the country. San Diego and Columbus and other places that have economic development organizations. It's run by and supported by the private sector. And that transition to the private sector is the aim, but it's early days.
Yeah, right.
And I would think that the success of this would breed success in private sector contributions would also build based upon a successful pattern.
That's certainly the goal. Just as a point of clarification, I also want to emphasize this would come out of the general fund, not our transportation revenues. Just a point of clarity.
To the point of it not being a long-term commitment, I'm fine with a 2-year commitment of spreading over 50,000. But as we continue to ask members, more and more organizations to contribute to this organization, I think we be conscious of that. I mean, we're in essence only turning money over that others are the same exact organizations who are now we're asking for money from are turning it over to an organization that they're also paying. So I just don't want us to be into a long-term commitment.
John, I agree with that. I had a long conversation with our executive director about exactly that. But I think to put our money where our mouth is for what we've done as an agency, to see something like this as an action from all the work that we put in, I think is well worth it. No further questions. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, or to, Let's go. I'm ready out of here. Ready? Although we do have a lunch. There is a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, a vote of no. And the motion carries. We
Thank you.
hope you come back soon with some good news.
I will, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Moving on to our public engagement plan, Tom Garrington. Tom, I haven't seen you in a while.
Thank you. Good to see you all. I will, let's see, trying to get this back. George, I just hit the button again. So, just to stall briefly. So if you view today's agenda as a menu and a banquet of a meeting, then that was a wonderful appetizer. You've got 2 entrees coming in the Mobility and Environment chapter, so I am the sorbet, by which I mean short and sweet. So I will just give you a quick overview of what we're doing.
That's why he's our public
Very
communication.
Here we go. You're also seeing why I'm not your IT person. Okay, thanks. So Tom Garitano, Communications and Outreach. Jane Grover is our principal for Outreach, and I think she's at a conference now. She was here earlier. She probably given me this overview. And we're going to talk mainly about what the agency is going to be doing in the coming months, specifically around the public comment period for the draft plan. To get there, this is where we've been. As you know, we started out with a launch event in this very room. in February/March 2016. We got sort of snowed out the first day and held an event for a handful of people who came, and then the next day we had the actual event. Good turnout and media coverage, 100+ workshops and survey, and the result of that and a whole lot of staff research and analysis and other interactions was the Emerging Priorities Report in 2016. And then everybody remembers last year, just about this time, we were getting started on the Alternative Futures phase. We rolled out one of the 5 futures every month for 5 months, another 120+ workshops all across the region, plus a series of forums. We had actually done some forums during the earlier process, but this time we did a series of 5 that were geared to the 5 futures. And the kiosks really helped drive up the number of people that we hit, which reached over 60,000 through the kiosks alone. And that, again, with more staff research and analysis, led to the preview report, which right now is the current public, most full representation of what's going to be in the plan, but that'll be about to change. As you know, you're starting to see the draft chapters coming before you, and the whole draft plan will come out June 15th, and there'll be public comment period through August 15th. So continuing activities, you heard Jane talk about the corporate engagement, which we're really excited about. CMAP didn't really have the capacity to do that back when Go to 2040 was adopted and the LTA program was starting, and so we're excited about the groundwork that's been laid there and building on that for the implementation phase. A lot of ongoing outreach to community organizations, communities themselves, especially with the draft plan coming out. She and her team are circling back, along with a lot of planning and policy and programming staff, to groups that they had already engaged to make sure that they're fully aware about the draft plan. So right now the working draft chapters are out for comment to committees, and you'll be hearing about 2 of those shortly, and the comment period I mentioned, and then I'll give you some details as a reminder at the end about the launch event on October 10th. Hopefully that's on everybody's calendar for Millennium Park. We're looking forward to that as a big celebration. So we really do not want to confuse the public about this being our big bang. And that's kind of the trick, is that we've built carefully, over the last several years, and this is the point where people can have their last say on what's going into the plan. But we don't want to confuse people about whether this is the launch, and so we are kind of doing the meat and potatoes outreach by a lot of staff, not just outreach staff, to all of our stakeholder groups, some of which are listed there. Legislative event coming up next month will be more along those lines. We likewise are just doing kind of surgical media engagement. Earlier this week, Joe and Jesse and Liz Shue did a call with some reporters about the regionally significant projects, where we just kind of wanted to let them know the moment that was posted publicly, and try and separate that coverage from the coverage of the plan, the draft plan itself. And there was some coverage in Herald and Cranes, and the Trib is still working on their story, which should appear sometime soon. So the primary general engagement for the public will be through 10 open houses and a concluding public hearing, which is required by the state statute, which will be here at CMAP. And you each got a flyer, I believe, thanks to Sherry, and there are more on the counter there for everybody else, and plenty more where those came from. The outreach team have these scheduled, and all across the region. There was a question earlier in the planning committee meeting about, was there other activity planned in the city of Chicago, for example? The final one here at CMAP will be the only one of these hearings or open houses that'll be held in the city, but there's a lot of ongoing engagement with community organizations and so on. These are just the series of public open houses, and at any time, not just now, but on into the future, you have a community organization that you want us to reach out to, go and meet with. We're always doing that, always interested, always want to know about it, and so we appreciate your help with that. And that's basically it. Just a reminder, October 10th, 10 a.m. to noon at Millennium Park. And we have our keynote speaker locked in, and he is Mr. Clarence Clarence Anthony, who's the executive director from the National League of Cities, and really excited to have him be part of the program in October. If you have questions, happy to answer.
Rita?
Yes, when you mentioned the city, Tom, you're working with Leary groups or?
So they're almost anything you could think of. So a lot of them are groups that we've already established contact with and explained, taking them through each stage of the plan up to this point. And now it's a matter of going back and saying, all right, remember we told you the draft plan was coming out, this is it. And so many of the same groups, I didn't bring a list of them, but the same groups that we have already contacted, we are going back to a lot of them just to make sure
And
that.
if we could, from the city standpoint, if we could see a list of those groups, so we
Be happy to
we
send
would
that.
know that the city's big, that it's being
We'll send that.
addressed.
We'll send that to you and to, pardon me, Commissioner. At the end of all of this, there will be an appendix to the 2050 plan, as there was with Go to 2040, that really wraps all of this activity up. It'll include literally every public comment that we got, not just a summary of them, but the comments themselves. And so we're really keep close track of that. So we'll be happy to provide that.
Yeah, and if, just a reminder to the board, as you know, when we went into the whole plan process, I set a goal for staff of more than doubling the amount of outreach that was done from the 2040 plan, which won an award for outreach. And at this point, we're hitting a mark of tripling. Staff has well exceeded the goal that we set, but it's not just a one touch and done. It really has been part of cultivating the ongoing relationships with folks and making sure that they know how to engage in the process throughout the entire process.
I think with the city's emphasis, especially on neighborhood development,
Yeah.
we want to make sure that we can, and Janelle's probably
No,
going to follow up on
we're on the
this.
same page. So,
As are we, yeah.
there are a number of convenings that obviously we facilitate in the city and work with third parties on. So, what would be helpful, we can talk offline, is to understand what type of feedback or engagement you're looking for, so we can find the best venues and opportunities for a CMAP to plug in, get again the right type of feedback and engagement, and then obviously take something appropriate.
Happy to do that. Really appreciate it.
Other comments or questions? Thomas, thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next important presentation is on the draft mobility recommendations as a major segment of the plan. Elizabeth and Jesse.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So to keep with Tom's analogy, we're gonna try to not make this like a Thanksgiving dinner where you all fall asleep. So I'm gonna try to go through. I know a lot of you have seen some parts of this presentation before, so I'm gonna go pretty quickly through sort of some of the slides to make sure that we get plenty of time for Jesse to talk about some of the financial plan and regionally significant projects piece. Just a quick reminder, the three principles of the plan outlined in the preview report. So prioritize investment, inclusive growth, and resilience. You'll see those woven throughout the chapter, as with all the other chapters. We drew on a number of strategy reports, studies, snapshots throughout this process. I couldn't even fit them all on the slide. We're going to be linking to them throughout the chapters, so all that good detailed information we won't lose it. We'll have it as part of the plan. The recommendations in the mobility chapter can be sort of roughly sorted into three goals. The first being a modern multimodal system that adapts to changing travel demands, a transportation that works better for everyone, and making transformative investments. I'm going to step through each of those pretty quickly here. So the first goal, we really often when we're in a planning process, we talk about how we're in a moment of great change. It can sometimes feel a bit trite, but really when we're talking about transportation, particularly right now, we really are in a moment of change where both the ways that people want to get around are changing and the technology that facilitates those travel patterns are both changing really rapidly. So the idea here is to make sure that we're looking to the future and responding to those changing patterns. So the first recommendation in this section is harnessing technology to improve travel and anticipate future needs. I'm not going to walk through each of these bullet points. They're just each of the strategies that are in this chapter. They're in the document that should have gone out to the committee. You should have all received it on Monday. But so in here we're talking about both using technology that we have today to improve the reliability of our transportation network through things like traffic operations, as well as looking into the future and the ways that we can make sure that we sort of shape technology in the direction that helps us meet regional goals. The second recommendation is making transit more competitive. We know that transit is the backbone of a truly multimodal system, and that we need to take steps to strengthen our transportation system to make it, our transit system to make it competitive as we go into the future. And that's going to take both investment in our system, diversifying and increasing the funding, action on the behalf of on the part of the transit agencies, but we really wanted to highlight, and this graphic is very small, don't worry about the details, but really wanted to highlight that a lot of strategies to make our transit system more competitive really rely on partners other than the transit agencies. Really investing in our land use, student development patterns, investing in our road agencies, investing in prioritizing transit service, and the policies like actively managing parking. Third here, retaining the region's status as North America's freight hub, really acknowledging that the way that goods are moving around the region and the way that people want to receive their goods is changing really rapidly, and the need to stay on top of that to preserve this really important part of our economy. So that means both thinking regionally about prioritizing freight investments and to compete for federal funding, and also looking at the local impacts of freight movement, and that's both looking at the potential negative impacts and also planning proactively about proposed major freight facilities. The second big goal area is a system that works better for everyone, and this really is focused on, as we're looking to the future and these changing technologies, we can't lose sight of the real issues that are in front of us today, and we really need to take action to make the system that we have work better for everyone. So the first recommendation in this section is to leverage the transportation network to promote inclusive growth. Inclusive growth strategies are woven throughout the chapter, but we really wanted to highlight a few here. And this draws a lot on the work that CMAP has been doing as part of the plan development process, looking at commute options for folks in some of the disinvested parts of our region, where we've really seen that even though they may have, particularly thinking about the south and west side of Chicago, relatively high transit availability, folks are generally not going to those destinations that are really well served by transit. So thinking about how can we work as the public sector and partner with new partners to improve commute options between disinvested areas and employment, education, and training and services. The second piece, this graphic is from our travel trends snapshot, and what I wanted to just highlight here is that the yellow bars, those are folks who are walking to work, and the lines at the top, those are the lower income folks in the region. And so the need to highlight improving access to public rights of way for pedestrians and cyclists and people with disabilities is an inclusive growth issue, and making sure that those connections to jobs are equitable across the region. The other piece here is just that not all communities are alike, and that we really need to make sure that we're increasing authentic, responsive engagement of underrepresented communities, and making sure that local communities can have the capacity to develop, fund, and maintain transportation infrastructure. So that's things like building pipelines of projects from these communities, making sure that they have access and can come up with matching funds for federal funding, and working on asset management in these communities. Finally in here, improving travel safety. This wasn't a major focus of the ONTO 2050 plan. We've really upped our game here. And the graphic here on the top is traffic fatalities. This is one of our proposed indicators for the plan, and it's one where we set one of the most aggressive targets. And our target is to eliminate traffic fatalities by 2050. And that will take a variety of strategies, including changes to design, really focusing on bicyclists and pedestrians and their safety, looking at ways we can use technology to improve incident detection and management, and the ways that we can improve our enforcement and education. And then finally, improving the resilience of the transportation network to weather events and climate change, both responding to existing transportation flooding issues. This graphic is from a newspaper in mid-February of this year, when everything was flooding. and then also using technology to improve our response to weather events. And I won't step on the thunder or steal the thunder of the environment chapter, which is next on the board here, but there's a lot of cross-pollination between these two chapters in this recommendation. So with that, I want to turn it over to Jesse to talk about the last goal area.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. I'm Jesse Elam, I'm the Director of Programming here, and I'm going to walk you through the last bit of this, which is about the funding, financing, and project recommendations. So I'll start off with something that I think you've seen and heard a lot about from us, and that's about the financial environment that we face as part of this plan that we're developing. Part of what we have to do by federal regs is do a financial forecast that looks at the revenues that we expect to have available versus the expenditures that we think that we're going to need to make. And when we put the two of them together, we find that we have a large gap. It comes to about $24 billion between the revenues we expect to have available and our expenditure needs. So with that in mind, a major recommendation area for the mobility chapter is growing revenues for transportation, sustainably growing revenues for transportation. There are a lot of options for how to do that. We wrote a strategy paper called Transportation System Funding Concepts about 2 years ago. Through discussions with the committees over the last 2 or so years, we have narrowed those revenue options down to these 5. Now, as a last step, there was a subcommittee of MPO Policy Committee members and CMAP board members that was formed at the end of the last year. They've met 3 times, I think, at this point. The object of that is to make sure that we have consensus on these five recommendations. When we met last time, they asked us to send it back to the Transportation Committee to discuss it further. But at this point, these are the 5 that we have, pending any fine-tuning that goes on by the subcommittee. They are roughly in descending order of how much revenue they could generate. Certainly we need more money, but it is just as important for us to get better and more efficient with the money that we do have. If we're being good stewards of the public dollar, then we always need to make sure that we are investing in the projects that have the highest return for the money. And a big part of that is using performance-based approaches to distributing funds and selecting projects, rather than just having customary or negotiated percentages for what money flows to what part of the region or what part of the state. I think we could hold up IDOT as having made some real progress in the past couple of years in how they do project selection with using a performance-based methodology for ranking project benefits based on safety, based on congestion, based on state of good repair, and a variety of other things. The other piece of this recommendation is that our maintenance practices need to evolve so that we're really doing asset management. And the idea behind asset management is that you're doing the right treatment at the right time, not just coming around every 10 years or so and repaving a street or using sort of fixed approaches like that. In the past couple of years, the states and the transit agencies have really started to do asset management, in some cases really started to do it. I will emphasize the started. And they're being driven to do that by federal law. We think that the frontier here and the recommendation that's in the draft mobility chapter is really for asset management to spread region-wide, particularly to local jurisdictions. Last part of this chapter is the regionally significant projects. These are the high-priority capital investments that fit within the plan's fiscal constraint. Yes, it's a technical term. I'll define it a little bit better in just a second. These are definitely not the only capital investments that need to be made in the region. These are just the ones that are big enough to meet our thresholds to get some more attention in the regional planning process. To remind you of how we arrived at the list of projects that I'm going to go over in a second, we asked for candidates from our partner agencies as well as from the public. Then we went through an evaluation process where we looked at things like the severity and the need that the project addresses, how well it modeled using 2050 forecasts, as well as how well the project fits within the On to 2050 plan's priorities. So the staff recommendation that we have for you, and that's in the draft chapter, really reflects, I think, the financial situation of the region and the need to rebuild and modernize a lot of our existing system. And we also look very carefully at projects that would benefit economically disconnected areas or disadvantaged areas, and that would support the plan's goals of investing in existing communities, of promoting infill development, of making goods movement work more smoothly and with less congestion. That's what I mean by meeting other planning priorities here. So, definition of fiscal constraint. What I mean by fiscal constraint. The federal planning rules that govern how federal long-range transportation plans are supposed to put together require us to show that there is funding reasonably available to make the investments that we recommend in the plan. And I think even if those rules were not in place, that's just good sense, right? That's what we mean by fiscal constraint. And so the projects in the fiscally constrained part of the plan can get federal approvals, they can participate in federal funding and financing programs. But the flip side, being on the unconstrained list in the plan doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad project. It may just mean that it needs more study, that it's not quite ripe enough or ready enough for the region to commit to. So I'm not going to go through the entire list of projects that are in the plan. I'm just going to highlight a couple. For example, the Eisenhower Expressway, one of the most congested expressways in the region. It's also falling apart. This project would reconstruct the Ike and add a managed lane, which in this case, managed lane means having a variable toll on the lane that goes up and down with traffic volume to help manage the flow of traffic and provide more reliability for those who choose to use the managed lane. This is an instance or a kind of congestion pricing, which we've talked about many times here at CMAP, and it's a major feature in Go to 2040. Another example is I-80. There are actually two I-80 projects in the draft mobility chapter. One is west of US 30 and one is east of US 30 going to 294. Western segment has some big state of good repair issues, the bridge over the Des Plaines River, other bridges through Joliet in bad shape, some pavement that needs reconstruction, as well as some big time safety issues. The eastern part of this, east of US 30, is a little bit more of a capacity addition, strictly capacity addition, but we're really recommending that this entire corridor be seen as one project and plan for that way ultimately. And that we should be looking really closely at a managed lane opportunity going through the whole I-80 corridor. There might even be some opportunities to look at things that haven't been done in this region or really many other places at all, such as truck-only facilities in association with I-80. Moving on to the transit system, the CTA has a big project to rebuild and add capacity to the Red Line, which is both the most highly used part of the CTA's L system, as well as one that has some really big state of good repair issues. And this project is actually in two phases. The first one is is funded and it's under construction now. It involves separating the flat junction between the brown and the red lines, which prevents additional service from being offered on the red line. And then in addition, the state of good repair issues that I mentioned is dealing with a lot of deteriorated viaducts and tracks and stations that ultimately need to be reconstructed. Another key transit priority is investing in bus rapid transit. The idea with bus rapid transit is that you can speed up bus service and make it more reliable and more desirable if you do things like giving the buses priority at traffic signals or stopping less frequently, or even giving the buses dedicated lanes either all the time or just during rush hour. So this is Pace Suburban Buses Pulse program, which does those things. And the staff recommendation, and there's quite a few routes that have been identified. Our recommendation is to constrain the first 6. The near-term projects that have been planned the most, and they're actually at work on the Milwaukee Avenue, which is the first line being opened here, and it should be open and ready for service this year, open to service this year. There are also a number of arterial improvement projects across the region, including several projects to add lanes in places like Lake County, to state routes in Lake County, to Randall Road in Kane County, to parts of 47 and 31 in McHenry County, and others. So to compare on to 2050 to go to 2040, what's different? One thing is the arterial and bus projects. That was not something that we actually looked at or considered or included in Go to 2040. At that time, we were only looking at expressway and rail projects. We think this does a better job of reflecting the region's overall priorities. We also recommend spending less on new capacity than in Go to 2040. And by new capacity, I mean expanding the system. And then the mix of projects is ultimately pretty similar. We are recommending here 60% transit new capacity and 40% new capacity by cost for the highway system. And then finally, there are 2 projects in Go to 2040 that are recommended for the unconstrained list in this plan. One is the Ileana Expressway, and that project would have the benefit of getting trucks from the intermodal facilities in Will County off of rural roads where they're contributing to congestion. But it is a new greenfield project, whereas the plan is directing resources to try to fix problems on the existing system. And so the plan is suggesting that we fix and expand I-80, which will serve some of the same travel market that the Ileana does, while fixing the many stated repair and safety problems that I mentioned before. Another project recommended for the unconstrained list is the Tri-County Access, otherwise known as the Illinois 53 Extension. That project, as conceived in Go to 2040, would do a lot to reduce congestion, but it is now undergoing a project study. IDOT and the Tollway are both collaborating on. That study really needs to finish before we know exactly what the project will be, what its scope will be, how much it'll cost, and how it will be financed before it's really going to be ripe to be entered into the constrained list. Last point I want to make here before I step away is about project revenue. So some of the projects on this list have the ability to offset their own costs by bringing in revenue. On transit projects, the project revenues we considered was value capture, and that's the concept that transit improvements can raise land values around the stations, which then drives up tax receipts, and those future tax receipts can be used to finance the original capital improvement. State law currently allows for specific projects to do this, and we have assumed revenues from value capture for those projects in this plan. On the highway side, project revenues are really from tolling. Go to 2040 had a lot to say about tolling and about congestion pricing. It was a big commitment, big policy commitment in the plan. On to 2050 continues that. Why? Because it's really key to financing highway improvements, and it's as long as you have variable pricing that goes up and down with traffic volume, congestion pricing, it's really a key way to help manage traffic over time. So the essential recommendation in the draft mobility chapter is that when expressway segments are being reconstructed, and there's a lot of reconstruction that's needed on the expressway system out to 2050, that tolling be implemented as part of that reconstruction job, and that the future tolls be used to help finance the project. So that was the funding, financing, and project side of this. Let's right back up.
And we just have one last slide here, which is just a sort of reminder of where we are in the process here. We'll be presenting at Transportation Committee and at Land Use Committee. We've been doing the rounds of many committees. A number of committees have, and everyone here has gotten an email from us with the full draft to take a look and review and send us comments. We're asking that you get us comments back by April 30th. So that we can turn those comments around and incorporate that in the draft that goes out for public comment on June 15th. We're also happy to meet with anyone who wants to talk through their comments. So feel free to reach out in any way you like. So I think with that, ready to open it for questions.
Questions?
Just a quick comment. I just wanted to acknowledge and thank staff, because I know when the first draft of the first iteration of this came out, we had a lot of thoughts and comments. They spent a lot of time with us on the transit side, and sort of I think the current draft really is captured and reflecting a lot of those combined perspectives, but just helping move it along. Thanks.
So of course I'd like to thank you too for all the hard work that went into getting us here. And just a comment, Elizabeth, you mentioned something that we all know, and that's the importance of funding for projects in those disadvantaged communities. I would also like to make sure that we continue to always link that with technical assistance as well, because what you find is that giving organizations or municipalities money doesn't always mean that the project can get done. And so I just think project management support and those kinds of things are really critical.
Absolutely, and I think that's been a real focus of the municipal capacity work that has come out of some of the outreach that we've done throughout the plan. Will be a big focus of our work going forward.
I think also on the transportation side of this agency, with new federal regulations, that it is really going to be down to the wire with submitting projects that don't have the necessary funding to complete it. So that's already going to be happening and spread out throughout the entire region, just on the federal dollars that come in annually.
Our goal is to make sure the local communities are successful, because only if they're successful are we successful.
One other comment about the gap, $26 billion gap, Jess. Do you address that, or I mean, is that just on the recommendations, or just on existing things? It's not new necessarily.
That's right. I mean, that gap is between the available revenues or revenues we think we have available versus the cost of operating the system and maintaining it in its current condition.
So at existing sources of revenue today.
That's right.
$24 billion short.
Right. So in the recommendations of going forward, which you list 5, certainly I think whether this agency conducts the opportunity for conversation regarding that, because I think there's so much misinformation out there, and a lot of it because of political reasons that people are afraid to do or not sure about what really road we need to take going forward to maintain or to potentially increase revenues to fill that $26 billion gap.
And that becomes part of our challenge, as you know, the federal requirement is that we project reasonably expected revenues. We don't get to just invent numbers. And there has to be a reasonable expectation that we can achieve the revenue growth in order to fund the improvement to the existing system, fix the challenges that we have, and talk about very, very limited expansion.
I make that comment only because after the original plan, one of the recommendations we had made, in fact, 4 out of the 5 recommendations we made on constricted plans going forward was the tollway. And I think anybody can deny the success of what the tollway has done, but there's money to support it. So that's the education I think people need out there, and I know everybody went nuts that they were going to raise the tolls, which they did, but what they parlayed into an improvement into the tollway system is incredible, and whether we want to believe it or not, I think that's the route going forward as to somebody's got to pay for this and maintain it, which is the other credible thing about the tollway, is that not only are they constructing new, but they're also continuing great maintenance on their roads.
Mr. Chairman, I think it comes back to one of the points that Jesse made in an earlier slide, that it's critical that the public understands that we are using things like good performance-based programming, that this really is about good analysis, that we choose the wisest investments, and then the work that we also have to continue on in better, managing existing assets and, taking a look at how we maintain and just get smarter and that much better. It's the only way the public's ever going to be comfortable with paying more. They have to be assured they're getting a return on their limited tax dollars.
Including from the state of Illinois or the federal government, and the most recent transportation plan is 80% local and 20% fed. That's not going to happen. And certainly the state of Illinois still struggles with a capital plan going forward. So whether or not there's hope or not, I think what this agency needs to do is be realistic about what we have now and how we're going to go forward with limited dollars. Yeah, somebody else? Thank you. Next on the agenda is the other phase of the plan, and that's our draft recommendations on the environment.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If that was the meat and potatoes, maybe this can be the wild salmon. I don't know. I've been trying to think of a good analogy. Okay. So we're excited to be here today to talk a little bit about, did it not do it? Thing? Okay. Our draft recommendations for the On to 2050 Environment chapter. I'm going to split the presentation with Nora Beck, and we also have another team member, Jason. I don't think he's in the audience, but there's a group of us writing this chapter. It's still very much in development, and looking forward to any feedback you have so that we can modify it to make it suit everyone's interests and needs. So we're building on a very strong foundation from Go to 2040's environmental recommendations. There were 3 main recommendation areas that were called out of the 12 in Go to 2040. Managing and conserving energy and water resources, and that was really looking at energy efficiency and renewable energy, as well as our water demand. Expanding and improving parks and open space, looking at conservation of high quality open space, as well as increased access to parks, and then promoting sustainable local food. And so for On to 2050, we really want to reaffirm those recommendation areas without repeating a lot of that content and build on it with the new recommendations we're including in the plan. We also had some other environmental themes that were echoed in Go to 2040. Greenhouse gas emission reductions, climate mitigation, brownfield remediation. We still think those things are critically important. They'll be coming up in our different recommendation areas as well. And we are including a specific recommendation area on climate mitigation because it's such a critical issue for our region. Just like the transportation team, we did a lot of strategy and snapshot development as part of creating our recommendations for On to 2050. These are some of the main environmental strategy development pieces that we use, but we also are trying to make a lot of connections to the built environment in our chapter. So looking at land use connections and transportation connections to sort of bring that infrastructure piece more tangibly to our environmental recommendations. And from all of that strategy development, looking at Go to 2040, our stakeholder engagement, we identified 3 major goals and 7 recommendations that form the basis of our environment chapter. The first is a region prepared for climate change, so thinking not only about how we can continue to intensify climate mitigation, which is really important, but also planning for climate resilience, acknowledging that these changes have already been happening and will continue to intensify, and preparing our communities to deal with some of those unanticipated and anticipated shocks and stresses that will be occurring due to climate change. We also have a goal area about an integrated approach to water resources, and this is the idea that our water resources should be treated as one resource throughout its life cycle, whether it's drinking water and tap water, wastewater, stormwater, thinking about it as one resource and coordinating efforts to manage that resource. So we have a recommendation area about managing stormwater to reduce flooding, which is obviously very integrally linked to the climate change recommendation areas. Protecting and enhancing the integrity of our aquatic systems, that's talking about water quality, and coordinating and conserving our shared water supply resources, really speaking to the groundwater dependent communities in our region. And then the last goal area is about development practices that protect natural resources. We know that there are a lot of ways that we can not only mitigate the negative impacts of development on natural resources, but help to improve our natural resources through redevelopment and through new development. So the first is sort of thinking about how to pull all of those redevelopment strategies together. And the second recommendation area is about prioritizing preservation of natural and agricultural areas when growth is occurring in the more rural parts of the region. And so Nora and I will just step through each of the goal areas and recommendations briefly, providing you with a little bit of context, but not spending too much time going through all the strategies. So we all know, I hope at this point, that climate change has already been affecting our region. We've been seeing increases in average temperatures and precipitation over the past century or so. And these 2 charts, which hopefully you can read, they're a little tiny on the slide, show projections for daily average temperature and annual total precipitation that are anticipated through the end of this century. Our projected daily average temperature under a high emission scenario could increase up to 13 degrees, which is very significant. And that would impact our region in specific ways, and those ways would include increased flooding, increased intensity of storm events, more extreme temperatures, and extended periods of drought. And so then those impacts will have a variety of other effects on our economy, the environment, our vulnerable residents, and other issues that we need to address. So planning for climate resilience is really thinking about some of those impacts and how we could respond to those in the future in order to respond appropriately to these effects. So the first strategy area, we've bolded a couple or one in each section that we'd like to talk through. Incorporating climate resilience and adaptation measures into our planning and development processes is something that we think is really important. We can build climate resilience and adaptation into sort of routine planning documents that we're putting together or development procedures. So thinking about climate resilience or climate change when we're putting together capital improvement plans and comprehensive plans. You don't have to necessarily have a climate focused plan in order to think about these issues. And this is something we've already been doing a bit of work on through our climate vulnerability assessments for the local technical assistance program. We'll be continuing to think about how to incorporate those issues into the work that we're doing, and we'll be recommending that our partners also include those different measures. And then the second strategy to highlight for this recommendation is strengthening our gray and green infrastructure to withstand climate change. We know that our hard infrastructure, roadways, sewer systems, et cetera, will experience increased stress as a result of climate change, whether it's from increased flooding or damage from extreme temperatures. And so thinking about how to design infrastructure for future anticipated climate impacts will help us to become more resilient overall as we move into the future. And then we also need to think about the green infrastructure that we sort of depend on to protect us from some of the impacts of climate change. Serves as a stormwater management resource for us and mitigates urban heat island effect. But those resources also will be negatively affected by climate change. So we need to steward those proactively to make sure they can continue to serve the same ecosystem service functions. And we're happy to talk about any of the other strategies if you guys are particularly interested, but we're just gonna hop through a few. For intensified climate mitigation efforts, it really is a recall of what we included in GO-TO 2040 with a lot of our land use and transportation recommendations and energy recommendations. But we wanted to focus on technological changes that can help us to mitigate the effects of climate change, such as zero energy, why can't I think of this phrase? Fuel efficient vehicles and low and zero emissions energy generation. And then also thinking about making a statement of the importance of comprehensively addressing energy and climate change at the federal and state levels. And we do have a statement in our chapter about affirming our commitment to the Paris Agreement and really forwarding those issues at those levels so that we can then take them on proactively at the local level as well and regional level. And with that, I will turn it over to Nora.
Thank you. I'm Nora Beck, and I'm going to talk about the two remaining goal sections for the environment chapter. The first of which is integrated approach to water resources. So the Chicago region is generally seen as water rich, yet we often fail to recognize that inherent value of this globally scarce resource. And as a result, our communities face flooding damages, degraded water quality, and challenges with our drinking water system. And these challenges are anticipated to increase with climate change and with urbanization. So this goal is about recognizing the value of treating water as a singular resource and that it could be reusable if managed appropriately. And this section identifies 3 recommendations to help us implement integrated water resource management. The first of which is manage stormwater to reduce flooding, and I'll highlight 2 of the strategies in this recommendation. Improve planning and development techniques to reduce current and future risk. This strategy is stressing the need that we need to incorporate up-to-date information about urban and riverine flooding into our plans and in our development techniques so that we can reduce our exposure to this flooding risk and then optimize our long-term investments. This strategy identifies a number of different critical steps to addressing that risk, whether it's the protection of open space, steering development away from risk areas, and then updating our county and municipal ordinances to improve stormwater management. The second strategy in this section that I wanted to talk about was address flooding vulnerability of critical transportation assets, and Elizabeth Urban referred to this in the previous presentation. We know that flooding is impacting our network either through declines in performance or increased maintenance and infrastructure costs. So this strategy is really recognizing the work that's already been done by the RTA or IDOT in assessing where are those flooding areas and how can we incorporate that into long-term investments. The next recommendation in this area is to protect and enhance the integrity of our aquatic systems, and this is really a more holistic recommendation in this area. And I'll highlight one strategy: create and implement multi-objective watershed plans. We've noticed that the most successfully implemented watershed plans are composed of work groups that include local, county, industrial leaders that are working to improve water quality. And so we want to build on the success of those practices, and then also broaden out the objectives of the watershed plans to include more stakeholders. So they don't have to just be focused on water quality. They can help us address flooding issues, water supply issues, and similar concerns. The next recommendation in this area is to coordinate and conserve our shared water supply resources. And I'll talk about two strategies here. Incorporate water supply and demand considerations into local and regional planning. So understanding both the available supply of water as well as the current and future demand are critical to making informed infrastructure decisions, but also land use and transportation investments. So this strategy outlines steps for integrating this information into local and regional plans. And it builds on something that we're currently doing to update our regional water demand forecast for the year 2050. The next strategy, strengthen regional water supply management. So in Illinois, our groundwater withdrawals are governed under the rule of reasonable use. So we have no statutory remedies for handling disputes, and we have no permitting program for withdrawals. So this can be a particular challenge when we're faced with the desaturation of our deep bedrock aquifer, as well as other impacts that we could have through climate change and drought. So building on the precedent of the Lake Michigan allocation program, this strategy is recommending that we develop a comprehensive groundwater management program to resolve those conflicts and ensure that we can manage the withdrawals for long-term sustainability. Now, it'll take several steps to get to that point, and so this strategy outlines some of those, and it recognizes that communities are already self-organizing to work on these issues together. The next goal of the chapter, the next and last goal of the chapter, is to develop development practices that protect natural resources. So during the planning phase, we discovered that from 2001 to 2015, over 140,000 acres of agricultural and natural lands were developed, and you can see those in red, and they're dispersed on the outer edges of the region, but combined, they're comparable to the size of the city of Chicago. We made some progress with land protection, and hopefully you can see that in this map in dark green, about 62,000 acres. And it's also clear in this map that a lot of our region is already developed, and you can see those areas in gray. And when that development occurred, it most likely did not include some of the best environmental practices that we know about how to manage stormwater, energy, water conservation. So this goal is focusing on harnessing the planning and development process to protect those remaining agricultural and natural lands, as well as improve the environmental performance as we're redeveloping our communities. This goal has two recommendations. The first is to improve natural resources through the redevelopment process. And I'll just highlight one strategy, which is to develop more strategies for addressing environmental challenges that disproportionately affect certain populations. So we know that environmental issues tend to have disproportionate effects on some populations, including low-income and residents and people of color. This strategy recommends that we continue to explore priority issues such as climate change, water loss and pricing, repetitive flooding, and how it impacts these communities, as well as develop some solutions. And that could include aligning green and gray infrastructure investments to address the unique needs of disinvested areas. And then our final recommendation area is to prioritize natural and agricultural preservation alongside strategic growth. And again, I'll just focus on one of the strategies here, plan for protection of agricultural and natural lands. On-to 2050 calls for infill and reinvestment and continuing Go-to 2040's policy agenda. But we know as the region's population grows, we're likely going to see valuable agricultural and natural lands face development pressure. So this is particularly true for locations at the outer edges of our region. So this strategy is recommending that local governments acknowledge these resources in their land use plans, recognize them as assets, and then updating their development ordinances to protect them. So that concludes our quick summary of the environment chapter. I did want to give you a heads up on our timeline. We have released the draft to stakeholders, and we're asking for written feedback by April 27th. We welcome your comments as well. Next week, we're going to be hosting 3 discussion sessions with stakeholders. This allows us to meet everybody in person, answer any questions, and brainstorm some solutions to concerns that they may have. In May, we'll be revising the chapter and then releasing it with the rest of the plan in June. And thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Okay, thanks. Up next, our state legislative update, Gordon. Back in session, right?
They are. Good morning. I am gonna take a break from the food analogies, because there's nothing tasty nor sweet happening in Springfield. As you, said, they haven't met since you, except for a handful of times since you last met. So the report doesn't have any changes that we are recommending you to take any action on. But what I did want to do was to remind you that following your meeting next month, make sure I got that right. Next month, we are traveling to Springfield and hosting an open house. And I am again inviting you to participate in that event, that activity. So it'll be May 10th. It begins at 8 o'clock in the morning, so it's pretty early. We will be following up with some information for you on travel options, accommodations in Springfield if you should need to go down the night before. And we will be sending out a letter within the next week, I believe. And if you've got questions or comments on things happening or not happening in Springfield, I'd be happy to try to address them.
Joe?
Yeah, just to comment on our forum for the legislators, the open house. Staff, most of us will travel down by train the afternoon after the adjournment of our meeting next month and spend the night in Springfield to be in position for the 8 a.m. and have the open house. It was fairly well attended last year. And obviously, while I prefer a sit down when we can convey information at one time to everybody, given the normal chaos of Springfield and people's variable schedules, the open house really is the best way to go. But we do have the opportunity for a lot of good one-on-one conversations.
So that's the day of the board meeting?
We will travel down after the board meeting, and the open house is the next morning at 8 a.m.
Go from here to the train and go down there. Gordon, I'm sure I've asked this question, but are we seeking funding again this year as a priority?
This is about the plan?
No, I mean, but
So you're
it's
talking about
different,
agency
different
funding.
from another lobbying day?
So as proposed in the IDOT budget, there is funding that is identified for CMAP. So we are always talking to legislators about our funding and the need to maintain that.
But the
I'm talking
presentations
about
themselves.
non-transportation funding.
Yeah, the
Yes,
presentations.
for the operations of the agency,
Which
correct.
should be happening.
Yes.
Yeah. But the presentations themselves will be focusing on the plan and plan development.
I kind of had that same question. Is there anything that we're actually, our initiatives that are there? I mean, I think I see everything is we're neutral on, which to me tells me it's really nothing that we're carrying or, encouraging them to.
So, yeah,
Is
so
there
there's,
anything that we want that?
so as far as legislation that's actively moving right now, there's not a lot that we are very interested in. There's a ton of things that, I'll say that our municipal friends and some of our, partners are interested in, but
Ooh,
it
there's
doesn't.
a long
raise
list.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
a
exactly.
long list.
There's a long
Quite a
list
bit.
of municipal issues, right.
And when it
There's
comes-
nothing in particular at this point.
When it comes to funding, we've been waiting for the report from the Revenue Subcommittee because the goal here is to make sure that once we begin speaking, everybody is speaking in a united front from a single song sheet. And so, we don't want to get out ahead of those efforts.
I would agree. I mean, once the plan is done and the revenue suggestions are completed, then that's really when that begins.
Gordon, I just want to let you know that I can't attend that, but I think Jeremy will be
Yeah, he
participating
did.
with you guys.
Thanks, Gordon.
Great.
Just a quick question, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Gordon, I noticed that we are neutral on these, but as I look at this, some of these bills seem to be in line with 2040.
Correct.
So might that make us consider supporting these if it's in line with
So,
2040?
yeah, so the bills that we identified as supporting Go to 2040, basically those are bills that you guys took action on last year. They're not, with one exception. And so we have already registered our support for those initiatives. The ones that have been reintroduced are in some, I'll say, state of inaction or inactivity. And so we have traditionally not taken a position on things that haven't moved out of the assignment committee or rules committee. Or if we've got wind that it doesn't really plan on moving it, that they're using it for a discussion item. And so that's the reason.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Gordon, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other business before the board? The meeting's up to the public. Any comments you may have?
No Garland.
The executive committee will meet immediately after this. Our next meeting, obviously, on May 10th.
Should that be the ninth, Wednesday? Not the 10th?
I think so,
10th is
yeah.
Springfield.
Yeah, 10th is Springfield, so.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I might, I just,
May 9th, May 9th, May 9th.
as
I
a,
had May 10th written down here.
wanted something positive to put out there from kind of follow-up report to the opening of our train station. I'd like to report that there is a large demand out there throughout the region for new transit opportunities, and we were at capacity for our station for parking within 2 weeks. And are already working with Metro on another major expansion, more than double the facility already this year. So happy to report that. Happy to report that people are very enthusiastically eager to see new facilities and new options. So good to hear.
I agree. If you build it, they will come, and that's been a theory for many of us for many years, and we have a couple issues out southwest, but hopefully that'll be resolved with some funding, federal funding, to free up.
I was just gonna sort of build on that. I mean, I think that, and that's one of the great things in the Go to 2040, while we're not talking about greenfield expansion, especially in the transit space, there are these enhancements and improvements that happen with the appropriate funding that do actually potentially add capacity and provide new access opportunities.
No, and for both of you, the Create 75th Street project has to be a priority that,
Without a doubt.
Heritage Corridor, Southwest Service, these things cannot grow until such time as the 75th Street project is completed, so.
And on a positive note, Joliet just opened their new station as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to know anything this board can do to support that grant that's been submitted.
Well, we've been knee-deep in it since day one.
Yeah, I know, but that is so critical. Anyway, then mine, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, signify in the usual manner. Motion carried, meeting adjourned. Thank you all. See you next month.
Yeah. Okay.